guys, so I feel like today's video is going to be one of the hardest videos I'll ever have to film. I feel like I'm going to forget so many things that I want to say and that I want to talk about in this video. If that's the case, I might end up writing something in the comments if there's something vital that I missed. But I wanted to share my story and my granddad's story and how everything happened the way it did. I know so many people will probably relate to this video in some shape or form, which breaks my heart because it's last month in December. This was the hardest thing I've ever been through in my whole entire life, and I wish that no one ever has to experience something like that. And I mean, I'm speaking from my perspective, like seeing it all happen, but I can't even imagine how my granddad was feeling, and I know his pain and worry that he was going through was probably a million times worse than what I was witnessing. Do you know what I mean? He was enduring what I was having to look at. So yeah, I'm sorry if I say the wrong thing or word something funny, because this is all new to me as well, and I'm learning about this different type of grief that I've been feeling this time, and I'm going to try my hardest not to get too upset, because my voice is so annoying when I'm like half crying, like from my recent vlogs. I know it's super annoying, so I'll try my best, but I can't promise that at the moment because it's still a bit raw. Again, this is from my own perspective as well, from this situation. Another person in my family could see this whole situation from a completely different perspective. Like, everyone's grief is so different and their stories are so different when it comes to grief. So yeah, please remember that it's my perspective and my version of the story, and also just a trigger warning, I'm going to be talking about death, cancer, grief, losing a loved one, watching that sort of process happen, because this is the first time that I've ever had to go through it, which I know could be lucky to some people, because some people might have lost many loved ones this way, and I for one have also lost many of my family and extended family to cancer, but I've never seen it firsthand as much as I did with my granddad. Here's the story. We had my granddad's funeral this week, which was so lovely to see all of my family there. Like, I can't believe how many people showed up and turned up for him to celebrate his life, and I did really see it as a celebration. I think I'd had a bit longer to process the grief, because I sort of saw the deterioration and saw everything happen. But yeah, basically my granddad to me he was like one of the biggest rocks growing up. Like, I'd say my mum, dad and my nan and granddad. My nan and granddad were close to being a mum and dad for me growing up. Like, I lived with them for the first few years of my life in London because I was born here in Tooting. And then when my parents decided to move to like Northamptonshire, my grandparents pretty much moved within a year or two to basically be with me and my brother growing up from when we were young. They were so prevalent in my life, and I know I'm so lucky that is the case. Yeah, I do know I'm lucky and I'm grateful in that sense that I was able to be so close to my grandparents. So yeah, my granddad was like a huge part of my life, and like a second dad in some respects. So I think that might be why this has hit so hard, because I feel like when you're in this stage of grief, like, there's a lot of comparison. Everyone has different connections with different people, and everyone copes differently, and I think that's something that I've learned, like, during grief, is to really shut off from comparison as much as I possibly can, because it is all so different. You really just need to sit back and just do what's best for you and stop focusing on like comparing your reactions to other people's. I took it pretty badly in the lead up to my granddad's passing, because I didn't really want to lose him, obviously, and I didn't want to lose him in such a horrible way. He was just such a big part of my family's life. I just couldn't even imagine like a world without him. It's been tough, and like, my nan and granddad have been together since they were 15 or 16 years old, I think it was. So they've been together for years and years. Like, my nan is turning 90 this year and my granddad was 88, so they've been together for 70 plus years, living their lives. And I think going through death and having death so prominent in my life at the moment has made me like just really reevaluate like everything, which I probably will talk about a little bit more later. but it's made me think like it's actually crazy, like when you find a partner, if you're with them for your whole life, which I know is very rare, and I'm so blessed to like see my nan and granddad being so in love with each other their whole life and just dedicate so much of their lives to each other. Like, it's so mad that they have spent their whole life together and they're the closest person in each other's lives, because when they've grown up, their parents have passed and they've just been like inseparable as a couple for their whole lifetime. It is very hard having to see my nan lose her soulmate. That's probably been the most difficult for me, and probably the more difficult since everything's happened in the last month. Like, just trying to be there for my nan, and everyone is so supportive and loving and really helpful, and it just makes me really value family more than anything at the moment. Like, seeing how incredible family is and like the unconditional love we all have for our families, very grateful. Growing up and stuff, like I said, my granddad was everything to me. Like, he taught me how to write, like his handwriting was so stunning. Like, if he ever sent a Christmas card or a birthday card to any of my friends and family, they'd always be praising his handwriting. Like, it was just such a big part of his personality. I feel like his handwriting was so stunning. He taught me like all of his favourite card games growing up. As me and like David grew old, like, he taught us both together. And even like on Christmas Day, when he was in the corner of the room in his bed, although he was awake, wasn't like awake, he was sedated. I just know that like he could probably hear us laughing and playing the games to try and make everything a little bit more normal at Christmas. So I will probably read my speech that I read out and wrote for the funeral, my reading, a little bit later on into this video. But yeah, I spoke in that about how he was there for everything. Like, whatever I did in my life, he was always there. He'd pick me up at the school gates if mum and dad were working and really busy. He'd be making sure I was safe if I was walking like a long distance alone. Be sat in the audience at every single performance I ever did. Like, growing up, I was doing like multiple theatre and shows every year. He was there all the time in the crowd, cheering, praising me, being like a proud grandparent for everything I did. Like, when I was really sporty and played basketball, the county and the region, he would always be at every single game, like cheering me on with my dad and stuff. So yeah, he was very present in my life. So when we got the news in December 2020 that the cancer that he had, we knew he'd had cancer and they had tried to treat it and everything. We then got told it was terminal in December 2020 because the cancer had spread to some of his other organs, including his liver, which was terrifying. We found out the news just before Christmas of 2020, and they said that he had 6 to 9 months. Obviously, that was very hard hitting just a few months before Christmas, and I had to isolate Christmas 2020, so that was very hard for me, not being able to see and spend that what I thought was my last Christmas with my granddad. And then 6 months passed and my granddad slowly became a little weaker. He was more breathless. He was very active. He was always walking about, like, he was very screwed on for his age, you know. He was always walking about, dancing, gardening. Like, he was very active as a person. So even just seeing him get a little bit weaker was quite hard to see. And I spent a little bit of time in summer with him. Obviously, I'd moved in 2021, early 2021. I moved to my flat in London, so I wasn't seeing my grandparents as often as I was before. I mean, COVID anyway, I didn't really get to see them much and spend that much time with them, which is obviously another thing that I've had to be like coping with in my grief stages, because I was never able to spend like the last few years like as much as I'd have liked to, you know, because of COVID and lockdowns, which I know a lot of other people have been struggling with. So yeah, I saw him in the summer a few times and he was a little bit weaker, but nothing too drastic where I seemed to get very worried or whatever. I never had seen, like I said, I never seen cancer firsthand, so I didn't really know the stages or how quick the deterioration starts, or I just sort of was on edge, I think, most of the time. Like, when me and Aidan went on holiday a little bit later in 2021, I was just on edge the whole time, thinking about my granddad. And then it got to my birthday, which is September, the 9th month of the year, which was where the doctors had given the estimation as the cut-off. And I went home to spend the weekend with my family. My mum, before I came back, was like, oh, granddad looks a little bit different, just so you're prepared, da, da, da. And I got back and I didn't notice a massive difference. I think because maybe my mum had said that, I was probably expecting it to be worse than it was, and he didn't actually seem that different to me. He just seemed a little bit more frail, a little bit weaker again. And he wasn't being able to move as much. He needed a lot of support. He was very unbalanced, which I think is what the cancer probably does. It like obviously weakens everything, every part of your body. He'd gotten a lot weaker, but nothing that scared me too much. That was just such a lovely time. Like, I've got a few photos from that day, which I'll pop on the screen as we go through the story. And then obviously I came back home to London, and I was a little bit worried. By a little bit, I mean a lot worried from this here on outwards, because he was currently exceeding that 6 to 9 month frame that the doctor had said. And then in October, it was my dad's birthday, and everything had to be postponed a bit because my mum got COVID, so we wanted to make sure that my mum was fully fine before we did my dad's celebration. So I think that was 2 weeks after. I went back home at the end of October. This was 2 months, almost 2 months in a way, because my birthday is beginning of September. Halloween time is when I went back again to see him. He'd gotten better. I don't know if it's probably from his generation. He would never complain about literally anything. Like, he never said he was in pain. Yeah, never complained about the cancer. If you didn't know him, you probably wouldn't realise it, apart from obviously the physical deterioration. He just would never complain. So brave, and like, I would never be able to do that. I would know I would be constantly complaining and saying how much in pain I was. So for him to do that is just absolutely mental, and I think that is down to obviously the generation, maybe like men not feeling like they're comfortable to say when they're in pain. I don't really know. I can't imagine it was very easy pretending that. But anyway, so I saw him at Halloween. We went out for a meal at Zizi, which is my like last memory of him sort of functioning a bit more normally, because he was able to walk at least. He was able to eat. He ate half of his food, which was like the most he'd eaten in a while. And it was just really lovely because it was just like my close-knit family out for dinner. So that's my last like special memory before it sort of turned a little bit worse. So a few days after I came back home, after Halloween, he had a fall. He was falling quite a lot, being very close to like hitting his head or causing like serious damage. So they took him into hospital, and he was in there for a month. We thought he was going to be in there for a couple of days whilst they put him back on the steroids or off the steroids or something. I can't really remember what they were doing, but we were under the impression that he was only going to be in there for a couple of days. COVID was worsening at this time, November 2021, a few months ago. So no one was allowed into the ward. We weren't allowed to see my granddad. We were trying to call up the doctors. They weren't putting us onto him. They weren't turning his phone on. So we had like no communication with my granddad, or little to no communication for about a month. So we lost another month with him, not being with him, which was extremely hard. I called him a couple times in the hospital and spoke to him. Had this really lovely video that I recorded of me chatting to him on the phone, so I will insert that because that was super special to me.
Let's hope we can meet that.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay?
Yes, lovely.
Yeah, it's lovely talking to you, darling.
You too. Bye, see you soon.
Yes.
Love you.
Love you as well. Lots.
Lots.
Yeah, lots and lots and lots. Okay, sweetheart. Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye, dear.
I went back in December, I think on like the 20th of December, so 5 days before Christmas, and they managed to bring my granddad out at the beginning of December, I think. Yeah, so he was in there literally for a month, and the only way that they could get my granddad out of hospital to spend his last month or moments at home was to get a critical care team in place. So we had the Age UK nurses, Marie Curie, and I have never had so much admiration and like gratitude towards those nurses. I obviously knew they did incredible things every day. Obviously I feel like everyone does know that, and you hear other people's stories, but when I saw it firsthand every single day, I cannot believe like the impact they had on my family's life. Not only my granddad and looking after him and making sure he had the most comfortable, best, as much as best can be, last day is like he kept my nan and dad going, and for that I'm just eternally grateful to those people. So I am going to be putting a link down below to the Age UK charity if any of you had any spare change or money I'm gonna leave that down below because they, yeah, like I said, they literally saved my family and gave my granddad the best possible month. And yeah, this is where I saw the like rapid deterioration from when I saw him. Obviously I thought he was doing way better when I had the meal with him end of October, and then December he's in a bed in the corner of his and Nan's lounge, obviously not being able to get out of bed, hooked up to a few things, having full care. Yeah, that was really hard to see. A little bit out of it maybe because of the drugs that they were giving him, and the confusion, a little bit of confusion, but he was pretty screwed on. Like, he was chatting to me about, he was asking how people were in London, how Aidan was, like how everyone was at home. He was asking me about my job and what I was doing. He was still like mentally in a good way at this point when I first went back. And then within a matter of days, like, it just got worse and worse. He had this rattle in his throat, which I spoke to some people, I googled it myself, and there's like a rattle that you get when your like organs are shutting down and you're like fighting for your breath. And whenever he would go to sleep, it would start, and it would be constant, and it would ring through my ears, and I can like still hear it now so vividly. But it's very hard to see that happen and watch that happen. Me, my mum and my dad would do shifts on the sofa each night so we could all try and get some sleep but also be there and looking after my granddad. So we'd sit in my nan's house. We didn't want my nan to be stressing out and having to run down the stairs for him, so we took shifts sitting on the sofa looking after him throughout the night, because he'd get a little bit agitated, and you know, he was probably in so much pain that he never let on. So yeah, within a couple of days of me being home, he was obviously getting a lot worse. The day before, I think it was on the 23rd night when my dad was looking after him, my granddad used to do like wine tasting across Europe as one of his jobs. He loved doing like different tastings and things, and he loved his whiskey. At 4 AM in the morning, my granddad would always wake up, whether it was me, my mum or my dad sat on the sofa. He'd always wake up around 4 o'clock. When he woke my dad up at 4, he asked my dad to pour him a whiskey. My dad like pulled him up out of the bed on his own to sit on the sofa, because he was like asking my dad if it was possible for him to sit on the sofa like one more time, because he'd just been in this bed. I found this like stuff very difficult because he was so active and would always be on his feet like doing something, so to see him not being able to like get out of bed was quite hard. So my dad picked him up, put him on the sofa, poured him a glass of whiskey, and he had like one sip and he was satisfied with the one sip, and asked my dad to put him back into bed. And I just think that's such a special moment for them to have, and for my dad to have that as a memory. Yeah, and then basically on the 24th, when everyone was awake and stuff, I wasn't there on Christmas Eve evening when all this happened, but the doctors told my granddad, my dad, my nan, and then my auntie and my little cousin that the best thing from this point onwards is to put my granddad under sedation, which again was new to all of us. Like, I'd never really seen this stuff before. I think my dad knew about it from things he'd seen in his life. The sedation would obviously put him as much rest as possible before he passed. And I think some of us were a little bit naive at first, thinking he would probably wake up after he said that the sedation would last 12 to 15 hours. So I think that was the doctor's way of saying that Grandad sort of had a day left to live, especially on Christmas Eve. It's Christmas, you know, like it's gonna be a pretty hard Christmas. Christmas Day came around, Grandad lasted the whole day, but he was sedated, which I don't know how many people knew about this, but it's essentially my granddad's eyes were closed, but he was obviously still breathing, and he just wasn't able to move any of his body. It was, yeah, like he was permanently asleep. So we still had to hear his poor throat rattling throughout Christmas. We tried to make it as normal as possible, but it was pretty impossible. It was pretty traumatizing, I'm not gonna lie. I made it through Christmas. We all said our goodbyes on Christmas evening. Aidan was there, he was my absolute rock as well throughout this whole thing. We're only a couple minutes drive from my nan and granddad's house, so it wasn't far at all to go. But we all said our goodbyes on Christmas night at about, I think it was 11 PM or something, because I thought my granddad's gonna pass in the evening, so we sort of said goodbye, and the nurses told us that my granddad could hear us, and I didn't know if it was like a nice like hopeful thing rather than a legitimate thing, if that makes sense. I thought it was just like a nice thought that he could hear us when he was in this sedated phase and couldn't speak or move, but it turns out he actually could hear us. And I asked the doctor when he came in the following day, because I didn't know, like I said, if it was like legit or not, and he could hear us because I sat next to him holding his hand on Christmas, and my family were like plating up the Christmas dinner, and I was just sat talking to him hoping that he could hear me, and he was just like squeezing my hand back to everything I was saying. And my family were calling me into the other room, and every time I tried to let go of him, he would just like squeeze my hand tighter to hold it. So that's one of the special moments that I had with him. And I told him, like, I thanked him for everything that I've told you guys about and my family about. I thanked him for always being there for me, for being so kind and supportive my whole life. It was really hard, like he had a little tear roll down his cheek. It was comforting in a way that he could hear me, but it was also like very emotional and very sad to see it as well. And I think what broke my heart the most is whenever my dad or my nan would start talking to him, I just felt like I was in this like horror film the whole time. I just couldn't believe it in my head. Like I remember most of the time I was just sat there like shaking my head constantly, thinking like this cannot be like a real life. Like I can't believe people go through this. I can't believe my granddad's having to go through this. I can't believe we're all witnessing this and actually seeing this with our own eyes. Like I couldn't believe it. Whenever my nan or my dad was speaking to him, it would break my heart, because I can't even imagine if this is the pain I'm feeling, what is the pain that my nan's feeling or my dad's feeling. My nan's life partner, they've known him for way longer than me, you know, so I can't even imagine that pain. Yeah, so we ended up going home, and I woke up on Boxing Day to find out that he was still here with us. I couldn't believe it. Obviously we were always at my nan and granddad's for the whole of like the Christmas period, every single day. Like we usually stay there until we got Barney. So yeah, we like rushed round on Boxing Day, spent all of Boxing Day with him. It was me, mum, dad, David, my nan, my auntie and my cousin, so all of my granddad's close immediate family, and then we had my godparents and Robbie and Michael, who are my nan and granddad's like lifelong friends, and same with my godparents there, like our closest family friends ever. So we were all there on my granddad's last day, because my granddad passed on Boxing Day, and it got to 11 PM on Boxing Day night and my granddad was still going. I'm very shocked at like how strong this man was. Like I couldn't believe he was still going when they obviously gave him the stuff on New Year, on Christmas Eve. He was still going 2 days later, and I mean he'd already surpassed the 9-month estimate by 3 months, which is just crazy. He was a very strong man. My nan started whispering things to my granddad. I think she'd finally realised that for him to be relieved of this pain, it was best for him to let go. And I think her saying all these things to him, saying that it was going to be fine and that we'd look after her, I think it made him finally like give up in a way that would relieve him from all the pain he was feeling. And it was so weird, like the fact that he couldn't verbally respond, but we knew he could hear our words and everything we were saying. It was just such an odd thing when someone is just like as if they're asleep but they're still hearing you. At like 11 o'clock his breathing really slowed down, and like I could see my dad look over to me like basically saying it's time. So we all huddled around his bed. There was 10 of us there, all like holding on to him, telling him it was okay to go. Like I said, he hadn't moved a single muscle since they put the sedation in him on Christmas Eve. And yeah, it was really hard seeing those last few breaths. Like I've never obviously had to go through that before in my life. But I know it was such a beautiful moment in other aspects, because we had all of our close family there together with him. Do you know what I mean? He was surrounded by all of the people who loved him so much. And I know that's probably one of the best ways in a way to go, rather than being alone, which I know so many other people have had to go through, which is so awful. So I know in a way that this is like a good thing. The thing that was so beautiful about it all was on his last breath, he lifted his whole hand up to my nan's face. I just think like their love is so strong. When this man, I can't even get my words out, like their love is so strong, like more than any love I've ever seen or known. Him lifting his whole arm to like hold her face on his last breath. Like, it's such a movie moment. Do you know what I mean? Like, what the fuck? Like, he defied everything, managed to lift his arm up to my nan's face. I just felt a small bit of relief in that moment that he was no longer in pain and suffering. And yeah, there was some peace in that, which was nice. I couldn't stop shaking, my whole body was like jittering like the whole time. And yeah, I won't even go into any more of the details about what happened there and after, as I feel like I don't need to talk about that. But yeah, it was a very emotional story, and I'm hoping that people can find peace or comfort if any of your stories are similar and you've had to go through something like this and feeling like you're on your own, because I definitely did and do. I feel like I can't believe that this has happened, and I can't believe, I don't know, I'm just in like sort of disbelief. There's so many emotions that come with grief that I never felt before. I lost my grandma when I was 15, and I felt grief in so many different ways, and I think because I was younger, my brain probably wasn't as developed. I've had spent longer with my granddad, so probably built up a lot more connection with him as I've like grown into my adulthood. Yeah, I don't know, I feel like there's different types of grief and elements of grief that I've discovered this time round. I definitely had to put my phone away a lot of the time because I was finding myself getting angry, and I sort of like understood trolls in like the tiniest way possible, because I just felt so angry towards anyone else's like social media stuff. I would just automatically go on my phone because I'm an addict with my phone when it comes to it, really, and I would just be like, oh fuck off, like why are people complaining? Are you complaining about something so small and minute and minuscule? When yeah, I just struggled a lot like with anger. I think that was one of my first emotions I think I felt after. I feel like the depression and the like sadness from it came in the lead up to my granddad's death, because I sort of had time to like process it was happening, but the anger like hit quite quickly. Yeah, I was very angry, and I know that that is wrong now that I've come out of the anger phase, because I just needed to process things myself. I needed to get away from social media, because I was just again going into that horrible comparison thing, and obviously everyone's little complaints and things are valid in their life. Like I just was thinking like, oh fuck off, like you have no reason to complain when your granddad isn't dying, you know. Like I was in that sort of phase, which I think a lot of people probably will relate to as well. When your day's going really badly and people are complaining about literally nothing, it just seems so stupid. That frustration phase was kind of hard to go through. I also had a lot of like flashbacks and hallucinations the night that it happened. Like me and Aiden were trying to go to sleep, and I could just see my granddad's body like where Aiden was, and it was just, yeah, there was like a very distinct image in my head that wouldn't go. I could hear my family crying, I could hear my granddad's voice rattling. Like there was a lot of like sensory overload and hallucinations straight after the death as well that was hard to deal with. Here are some notes that I wrote like after the death that I thought would be maybe valuable to other people, or it was more like I wrote them down as observations, relax my mind and things that I was thinking. So I wrote that no one can prepare you for how you cope or how your body reacts when a family member or loved one dies. All of my family were seeing the exact same thing as me, but we were all coping so differently. And yeah, that was something that I first observed. I noticed that I like to talk about the inevitable and what was going to happen, and yeah, I think for me speaking is therapy, like massive therapy to me, like talking about what's about to happen, what's going to happen, and how we're going to be able to deal with it. Whereas I know that that was triggering other members in my family, so I had to notice that and be very cautious when I was speaking and who I was speaking to. Oh, this is another thing back at the anger and sort of frustration phase. I was finding it like, I know people were trying to make me feel better by saying he had a really good long life, but it was really annoying me because it wasn't making it any easier for me to handle because he'd had a long life. Like I just thought, yeah, I know he had a long life, but that's like not taking any of my pain away. Yeah, I just found a lot of frustration in some of the things people were saying, but I think that was just purely from that phase of grief that I was going through, and I know that people were saying it with good intention. I wrote that watching someone so innocent and loving and kind and supportive with literally not a bad bone in his body deteriorate in front of my eyes was probably the most evil and heartbreaking thing that I've ever had to experience in my whole lifetime. Yeah, these were just random thoughts that I had that I felt better after writing them down. So Yeah, I also wrote, I can't believe how incredible the nurses have been that have dealt with these situations day in and day out. The world's true superheroes. I never truly understood the meaning of what they did until my granddad, and I'll never be able to express my gratitude for them, which I feel like I spoke about earlier on in the video. Like, they are angels, the actual angels that are walking around on the earth. I wrote that I felt like I was grieving so much earlier before the death, so I was feeling the anger and other emotions afterwards. I put, before, when I dealt with grief with grandma and close family death, I didn't get all of the emotions I'm experiencing now, anger, jealousy, things like that. Why are people complaining about small shitty things when people are dying? That is what I wrote. Clearly was in my anger phase. I also got a lot of anger from, there was a doctor that rang my dad, and I still kind of feel angry towards this, I'm not gonna lie. Maybe this will go and turn into something else at some point. The doctor rang my dad 2 days after my granddad passed and asked my dad what to put down as his cause of death. What? Like, why are you asking my dad what the cause of death is? One, it's obviously cancer, because this doctor had been coming in every other day to check and supply him with what he needed. Like, I'm so confused. Like, I'm still confused to this day about that, and it does make me angry, so I'm not going to talk about that for too long. And yeah, we just had his funeral on the 20th of January, so almost a month later after he passed. I managed to go see him in the Chapel of Rest the day before we had the funeral, so I got to see him again, and he looked so much more peaceful. They'd made him look a lot better than what he did the last time I saw him, so it was nice to see him look like he was actually sleeping. So yeah, then we had the funeral. It was a very emotional day. It was nice to celebrate his life, and we had so many people cramming into my nan's house to celebrate his life afterwards and celebrate as a family and talk about all of his amazing things, the amazing things that he did growing up. I found it really hard to see some of the cards that my nan had received from my granddad's friends talking about him. There was a guy that called him a quiet, unassuming friend that everyone loved, and I just feel like that was like the perfect description of my granddad. Like, he was very observational, had no judgment in his body. Yeah, he was just really lovely. And the woman who did our funeral service at the end said, let me find the quote because it literally broke my little heart. They said, "The world is full of husbands, fathers and granddads. They say that no one's perfect, but to be Bill Price was close enough." Makes my heart hurt. And for his reflection music in the funeral, we put roses down on top of his coffin, which was really emotional but really sweet. And they played one of his favourite bands, the Eagles, Take It to the Limit. And it was just a really nice moment. My reading went well. I managed to hold it together and not cry, which was good. And I'm going to share that to finish the video. But yeah, that's my current story of grief. Maybe I'll update you all in a couple of months to see how I'm going with it. But at the moment, I'd say that I'm having some really bad days and some okay days. And yeah, I just want you to know that you're not alone if you're also going through this. I know quite a lot of you messaged me on Instagram saying that your grandparents or a close family member had also died during the Christmas period, and it was really, really hard to cope and deal with. And I'm with you. Grief isn't linear as well, which is something that I've realised. So I'm taking every day as it comes and trying to get on. And I know that these horrible feelings will only be temporary, and that although I'll always carry the grief, that it can be made smaller and smaller, and I can just carry it on in a little bag behind me rather than weighing completely on my shoulders, which is an analogy that I found from someone's podcast. I can't remember. I think it was Dr. Alex George in The Diary of a CEO. I think that's how he described the grief, that it was like crushing him, and then he's been able to compartmentalize it and put it on a little shelf in his room, so the grief and the sorrow never fully goes, obviously, because it's part of your life, and it's someone that will be deeply missed, but it's not completely soul crushing. So yeah, I hope that analogy, you find some comfort in that analogy, because I did. Here was my reading at my granddad's funeral. It was really special to me to write that myself. Thank you all for being here today to celebrate the amazing life of my wonderful granddad. He'd be honoured to have all of his amazing friends and family in this room that have supported him throughout his years. I don't think I'll ever be able to put into words the impact Grandad had on my life, and I'm sure the huge impact he's had on many of our lives sat here today. There's no one that can quite compare to you, Grandad. His wisdom, his kindness, his compassion, and his support through everything I've done in my life so far. The list goes on. Grandad helped to shape me into the woman I am today. As I grew up, he gave me handwriting lessons. He taught me and David how to play his favourite card games. He shared stories about his adventures across Europe.
He was always there in the crowd at every single sports day or basketball game. He was in the audience whenever I performed on stage. He was the biggest cheerleader a granddaughter could ever ask for. To Grandad, I'll miss you an indescribable amount, and I know that you'll still be with us as we journey on. I'll never forget your laughter, your charm, or the smile on your face. I'll never forget the encouraging words you'd always give me whenever I'd say goodbye to you. I already knew how important family was to you, and a few days before you said goodbye, you told us about how you didn't want to leave us all behind. The strength you've had through this last year was admirable and brave. There is relief that you are no longer suffering and in pain. I know your love for Nan was stronger than any love that I've ever seen, and I promise that everyone here will be looking after her for you. Sleep tight, Grandad. I know we'll meet again some sunny day.